Not a
Okay.
chance.
Not a chance. Since we spoke last, the Ukrainians have disabled a portion of, they haven't destroyed, the major bridge into and out of Crimea. President Putin has apparently, since he doesn't announce these things, responded by attacking non-military targets. The Ukrainians continue to insist that they are pushing the Russians back. How do you see this going in light of the events that have occurred since last we spoke? And you may take issue with my summary of them. My summary is based on what I gleaned from your writings, from our colleague Scott Ritter, and our former friends in the mainstream media.
That's right. First of all, just to go very quickly to the bridge, that was a truck bomb, and the evidence is mounting that the SAS had a hand in it. It was a very elaborate plan. The British Special Operations Forces. That's what's coming out in open source, which doesn't surprise me. The SAS, by the way, is far more audacious than our own. And they seem to have had a hand in building this truck bomb, moving it around through Armenia and into Russia, and then driving it up to the bridge. Having said that, the damage is really quite minimal. And it did not interrupt the rail traffic, which is really what's critical, because Russian logistics depend heavily on railroads. They cross the vast distances in that country with ease and move most of the equipment and people. And the spans themselves, there are still 2 lanes carrying truck and automobile traffic. So I think we really grossly, as usual, exaggerated the impact of that. Now, as far as
did the British special forces miss their mark? I mean, did they really think that this bomb would slice the bridge in 2 and prevent all traffic from going across it?
Who knows? I mean, how much of that they did, and how much the Ukrainians that were working with them did, who knows? I just thought it was interesting that in British sources, open sources, as elsewhere, people are mentioning the SAS, and I'm not surprised, because they are actually very effective, and I've seen them in action 20 years ago and 30 years ago. They're very good. Now,
do they do underwater work? Might they have attacked the Nord Stream pipeline?
I have no idea. That's a question I can't answer. I simply don't know. So again, if I had the facts, I would say something. I don't have all the facts on the bridge, but I know what didn't happen, and I know what's coming out through open source material.
Is there any more intel or any more analysis from you about the Nord Stream attack, which of course now is nowhere near the front pages? Once they hit that bridge, people forgot about Nord Stream. Has it been repaired? Is gas going through it? Has anybody claimed responsibility? Is there any evidence as to who might have done it?
I haven't anything more to add other than to say that apparently one pipeline in the conglomeration of pipelines that constitute Nord Stream 2 apparently is still full of natural gas, hasn't been damaged. And the Germans, and I think with the Danes and the Swedes, are investigating, but German spokesmen and the government have already said it looks as though they can repair it, Judge. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure the Germans will do everything in their power to repair the damage if it's repairable. So no, I have nothing else to add to that.
I'm of the view that President Putin's saber rattling of nuclear weapons and President Biden's, what I think are reckless responses, are not serious and are just aimed for the television audience. I can't imagine Putin using any form of a nuclear weapon or chemical weapon. Can you?
No, it's off the table. And there is no evidence whatsoever that the Russians are moving any nuclear warheads or preparing to use a nuclear weapon of any kind. So that's utter nonsense.
What kind of a nuclear weapon would they use? Give us a little bit of an education. We're not talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This must be some sort of a low yield, if such a thing exists, defined weapon that hits a specific target, no?
I would tell you that unless they are attacked with a nuclear weapon themselves, they will not employ one. And that's been made clear repeatedly. What Putin said before the intervention in Ukraine, this is actually in 2021, in response to statements by Zelensky, who was talking then about acquiring nuclear weapons, is that he warned Zelensky that if they acquired those weapons, that Russia would treat that as an imminent threat, an existential threat to Russia. And subsequently, he made it clear on more than one occasion that if they are attacked by a nuclear weapon, that they will respond, they will retaliate. Now, he and others who work with him have always said that our discussions, which are widespread in the United States right now, about the potential use of low-yield nuclear weapons, that is 5 kilotons or less, is insanity. They stick really closely to the notion of mutual assured destruction. And when we talk about limited nuclear strikes, limited nuclear war, which is what you're getting at, they see that as very dangerous because, again, their inclination is to regard the use of any nuclear weapon by us as an existential threat, precipitating a first strike from the Soviet or the Russian arsenal. Remember, they've got some 630 warheads, 6,300 warheads, about 500 more than we've got.
All right. So what is a nuclear weapon today? Is it the Fat Boy, which was the nickname for what they dropped on Hiroshima? Is it a bomb that comes out of a B-52? Is it a missile? Does it aim at the Empire State Building?
What is it? The predominant means of delivery today is a missile. Now, we do have the capacity, and so do the Russians, to try and fly a bomber and deliver ordnance. Probability of that happening now is very low. Bombers are likely, if anybody thinks that they're carrying a nuclear weapon, they're going to be shot down. Bombers are not invincible, invisible, invulnerable. It's a lot of nonsense. Stealth is an illusion. Forget it. It can sometimes delay detection, but it cannot avoid detection. So the missile is the way it would be delivered, either from submarine or from land-based systems, predominantly mobile systems in the Russian case.
And what does low yield mean in terms of people in the streets? Do they die, or does the nuclear stuff go away after a day? Or will it have the type of long-term effect that Hiroshima and Nagasaki had on the poor souls that were victimized?
Right. Any nuclear weapon always results in blast, heat, and radiation. Now, a low-yield nuclear weapon, if it were delivered against a Capitol building, would annihilate everything in the immediate capital area. You know, for those of you that know Washington, D.C., from the rail yards over to the Navy Yard, as an example, absolutely, without question, would be destroyed. Will there be fallout? Absolutely. There is always radiation. Much depends on the altitude at which the nuclear weapon is detonated. Now, I don't see that happening. I happen to agree with you. I don't see any evidence that the people at the top of this administration are dangerous or insane in that sense. I think they understand the consequences. I wish they'd shut up and stop talking about it. Putin clearly understands the consequences and is not going to go there.
All right. Have the 300,000 reservists that Putin called up gone through their training, and are they at the front lines, or has the battlefield, in quotes, not yet felt the effect of the people the manpower that he called up a couple of weeks or about a month ago now?
No, the battlefield is not feeling the impact of those reservists yet. The reservists, and I can't tell you what percentage is now joining units and what percentage may still be in training, but mobilization has gone very smoothly, contrary to the reports here in the West. We keep talking about hundreds of thousands of people running away. I don't see any evidence for that. Some, yes, lots, no. And in fact, the mobilization has had a very interesting impact on the Russian population. I read a report quite recently from Germany by a journalist who talked about listening to Russians discuss it, the population, openly on television and in the streets. And they say, you know, Putin made a terrible mistake with his incrementalism. He should have struck decisively right away. And this war has now moved from being a limited operation involving exclusively professional troops to a people's war. We need to finish this thing. We need to get it over with, and we need to strike decisively. So this is not weakening Russia. It hasn't destroyed cohesion. It's building unity, and it's building support for the war that Putin says is necessary. So I think that's important.
So this is now the description you just gave us. Let's use the right force and get it over with. This is now the consensus of the Russian public. It is not Putin's a monster or Putin's incompetent. It's Putin is correcting his original mistake and we're supporting him. Is that a fair summary?
I think that's a fair summary. You know, the other thing, too, to keep in mind is these reservists are going into groups of Russian forces that are collecting in the south and on the borders in the western part of Russia and in Belarus. And these forces are going to be quite large by the time they are amassed, but they will not be used in mass in a concentrated fashion, I would say, until November. What you're seeing happen right now, after all of these massive counterattacks launched by the Ukrainians that achieved, frankly, nothing strategically at all, they've taken such horrendous losses that now local Russian forces are taking back the terrain that was lost. This is happening down near Liman. It's happening in the direction of Bakhmut. It's happening in Kherson. The very few kilometers that they managed to scrape out are being lost. I think what we're watching are modest attacks by the Russians to straighten lines and set the conditions for the really large offensive that will break in November.
Is there
the ground freezes? Remember, that's a precondition.
Is there a military purpose to the recent attacks, heavy attacks on civilian and populated areas by the Russians?
Yes. This was not, by the way, they say, well, we didn't attack non-military targets. Wait a minute. If it's vital infrastructure that provides power to the railroads, power to the population to heat itself, if it's destroying transportation infrastructure that moves food and supplies, those things are militarily important targets. So this propaganda is, well, now Putin's attacking the people. Shut up. He never has. This is more serious. And
let me make another suggestion. Might the attacks on populated areas be a military goal of getting the Ukrainians to move their anti-aircraft defenses away from the front lines and back to the populated areas, thereby giving more support to the Russian troops on the ground?
There were 3 salvos of missiles launched, 202 missiles. The Ukrainians claim to have shot down 27% of those missiles with their air defenses. We have no way of knowing. Can't validate it. May be true. But we do know that the Russian attacks destroyed 80% of Ukrainian air defenses.
Wow.
That's a very large number. And that's why Zelensky was on the phone almost immediately with Biden pleading for more air defense systems. Secondly, those missiles struck the infrastructure I just mentioned, and they also destroyed key targets where there were intelligence analysts, including the secret police headquarters in Kyiv. These things were targeted so that the Ukrainians would know 2 things. Number one, we can do what the Americans can do. We have the precision-guided munitions. We have the technology and the capability. Number 2, you cannot hide from us. When we finally attack, we will strike just as we did now, only in far greater ferocity, far more targets throughout the depth of the country. These are the things that he refused to do back in February, would not even contemplate it.